公共安全，透過爭取可負擔房屋同埋心理輔導計劃等等嚟解決犯罪嘅基本原因。
Our seniors shouldn't have to live in fear. Our residents shouldn't be forced out of their homes, and our Chinatown small business owners and residents should not need to form their own patrol teams to fend for themselves. APEN, as a member of the Oakland Chinatown Coalition, has been working on strategies to increase public safety with pilot programs that work, like getting people housed, access to mental health programs, and so much more, and really to address the root causes of crime.
我哋華埠會屹力不倒，然而我哋華人嘅自力更生嘅能力唔代表政府官員可以忽視我哋華埠居民同埋小商業嘅訴求。好多其他社區嘅領袖都已經企起嚟為我哋華埠撐腰。我哋嘅市議員主席麗琪、市議員 Rebecca Kaplan 同埋 Carol Five 都支持我哋，但係有一啲市府官員唔重視我哋嘅付出。我哋要求市長麗比同我哋一齊合作，制定一個由社區主導同埋我哋文化相關嘅解決方案。
Our resilience is not the reason for government officials to ignore the needs of Chinatown residents and small businesses right now. Chinatown is here to stay, and so many other community leaders have come out to share their support, love, and solidarity, including Council President Nikki Bass and Council members Shang Tao, Rebecca Kaplan, and Carol Fife. However, there's still folks in City Hall who have not valued our contributions, and we demand that Mayor Schaaf join her colleagues and work with us to provide community-driven, culturally relevant, and trauma-informed solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jing. I'd like to invite Sarah Wan, who's representing the Community Youth Center and the API Council.
Thank you, Xin. The amount of grief we are experiencing in our community feels at this moment is overwhelming. API Council and our 57 member organizations who serve thousands of families and elders throughout the city face an incredible challenge. They do not feel safe. We do not feel safe. As the rate of violence continues to rise, and as we as a community are left to find meaningful ways to heal and support each other, we remain resolute in our pursuit of peace and solidarity among those of us on the margins. Unfortunately, this is not the first time we have convened to shed light on racial tensions and the search of anti-Asian violence and also racism. Indeed, the traumas endured by the survivors will remain long after today. So it is our obligation to ensure victims and survivors are afforded resources and services. We understand many feel galvanized to take action. So in the spirit of our community and healing, we are announcing the creation of a Victim and Survivors Fund in San Francisco. Our Coalition of Community Safety and Justice is in the process of building a citywide social support and safety infrastructure to provide service coordination to assist our Asian American families and victims of crimes. Community safety, wraparound services for victims and their families, and restorative justice just are the core of our efforts. While we are granted an initial amount of $700,000 through the City of San Francisco and the Board of Supervisors to establish this network, we must work toward ensuring this kind of programming becomes sustainable in the years ahead. It cannot just be a pilot program. As a community beginning together a long journey towards healing, we acknowledge that identifying the root causes of tensions that lead to this violence is imperative. I call on all our elected leaders and mayor to join us as allies and to champion this cause. We cannot do this work in a vacuum. We cannot do this alone. We need to build allyship with all POC communities. We need support, awareness, and a meaningful way to address this xenophobia. We also identify solutions informed by the inequities that plague our city. We hope today will be a measure of hope for survivors of violence and racism. 喺呢個時候，我哋社區喺度經歷緊好切膚嘅悲痛同埋惶恐。亞太裔嘅議會同埋我哋57個成員嘅組織，包括 CYC， 喺全市服務超過數十萬嘅家庭同埋長者嘅同時，亦都面臨咗好大嘅挑戰。不幸嘅係，呢個已經唔係我哋第一次為咗激增亞太裔被歧視同埋受暴力行為而召開嘅種族緊張關係會議。事實上，幸存者所承受嘅創傷，亦都會喺今後長存。所以我哋係有義務確保受害者同埋幸存者獲得所需要嘅資源同埋服務。 本住呢個精神，我哋都喺呢度宣布成立三藩市受害者同埋幸存者嘅基金。呢一個基金係建立喺全市社會支援網絡同埋安全基礎設施嘅關鍵成分之一。我哋嘅行動嘅核心係提升社區嘅安全，整合受害者同埋家庭所需要各方面嘅服務，同埋倡議司法性嘅公義。我哋需要支持、注意同埋有意義嘅方式嚟解決呢一種普遍嘅仇外心理。我哋希望今日將會成為暴力同埋種族事故幸存者嘅希望。
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'd like to next invite Judy Young from the Southeast Asian Development Center.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Judy Young, and I'm the Executive Director of the Southeast Asian Development Center, formerly the Vietnamese Youth Development Center. Our center works with immigrant and refugees from Southeast Asia, primarily those of Vietnamese, Cambodian, and Laotian descent. Over 20,000 Southeast Asians reside in San Francisco alone. We are 3 days away from celebrating the Tet Lunar New Year. It's hard for our community to celebrate with the violence targeting the Asian, Vietnamese, and Thai community across the Bay. Only 4 months ago, I spoke to some of the same press on the attack on our elderly Vietnamese lady in the Tenderloin. I'm saddened by the second incident, specifically targeting the Thai elder who died as a result of the injuries. I'm shocked that this is actually my second press conference I'm doing for our community. The attacks are hurting our community. Our communities are already vulnerable. 95% of our clients earn less than $30,000 a year, 3 times less than the city's median income. Our youth high school graduation rate is 70% compared to the national rate of 87%. We fear the violence will push our community further into isolation. We ask our officials and city leaders to tackle these issues with the following recommendations. 1, the city needs to invest in resources to support the victim and ensure that the community feels safe. What does this mean? This means that when a victim gets hurt or injured, it's not only the victim, but it's their family. Services need to be wrapped around for both the victim and the family. It has to be from start until the case closed. And that's part of the accountability. We need to know that there is justice, there's restorative healing, and that all sides of the victim and the perpetrator, that is, we're able to support the whole person. And what I've heard from our community is that these the cases, the families don't know what happens after the cases go to court. We need to make sure that accountability follows through all the way until the end. Second, we need to support our communities of color with economic, social, and economic services. To combat the violence and hate, we must invest in the communities most impacted by poverty. These include more jobs for our youth, our young adults, educational, vocational training that makes sure our young people are earning money and they're keeping busy. Finally, we must heal our communities hurt most by systemic racism. We need to bridge all communities to heal. This must stop. We must act together to heal and move towards an equitable society. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Judy. And now I'd like to invite Stanley Pun with APAL, Building API Community Power.
Okay. Greetings, everyone. My name is Stanley Pun. Gender pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm the co-director of APAL, Building API Community Power, based out in Oakland, Chinatown. We are a youth political and leadership development program that seeks to build youth power and uplifts the voices of Oakland youth. We've served the Oakland community for the past 23 years, developing youth leadership, working to fight for racial equity, education justice, against displacement, and for the needs of API communities and young people. As an organization, we stand for the healing and support of families, individuals, and the community, for communities being bold and creative to develop initiatives that focus on intervention and prevention, not just reactionary strategies that could potentially harm other communities, and seek solutions that holistically benefit the Oakland community and the Bay Area and more broadly. I'm here really lifting up the voices of our young folks. So our youth leaders throughout this pandemic have witnessed and experienced the emotional and psychic trauma of heightened climate towards anti-Asian racism. They feel the pain, sadness, anger, and frustration of being both a target of racism, while also having their stories and struggles invisibilized due to false narratives, such as the model minority myth, and a past administrations that has emboldened anti-Asian violence by racial scapegoating. We all need healing and justice to build solidarity for the foundation to work together cross-racially, cross-generationally, and cross-culturally to build long-term solutions that create pathways for equity for all communities of color in Oakland and the Bay and abroad. In this current moment and historically, I'm just going to be explicit about it. Policing has not meant safety for communities of color or young people. Our young people don't feel safe around the police, as do many other communities of color. Anti-Asian racism is nothing new, and more police has often not meant more safety in our communities. Our youth leaders understand that the police institution was created because of white supremacy, state control over Black, Indigenous people of color, starting with slave patrols and now being utilized to incarcerate and harm other communities of color. Really wanting to lift up the name of Christian Hall, the young API man who was gunned down by police in Philadelphia. So we kind of see this kind of connection that the police have not helped our communities in the ways that they are supposed to. So how do we invest and build towards our collective liberation to support our communities out here? So we need to seek solutions that address the harm that has happened, our community centered and principled in not creating more harm, as well as addressing the root causes of violence and harm in our communities. While there's no easy solution, we know that our power is rooted in our communities, the relationships we build, and the power to collectively grow together. And that cannot happen without investment in resources for healing, justice, accountability, proactive relationship building, and intervention and prevention. In short and in closing, we need to work together from a space of compassion, empathy, and understanding to seek justice, not vengeance, to process our pain, heal from our wounds, and to build cultural capital and community investment programs that involve and invest in our communities. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Stanley. And I'd like to invite Ener Chu from East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation.
Hi, thank you, and good morning. East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation is a community development and affordable housing organization with a mission to build healthy neighborhoods in diverse communities across Oakland, and especially in Chinatown, the neighborhood where we were founded 46 years ago. One really important facet of a healthy neighborhood is a place where all people feel safe and welcome. And we know that community safety is fundamentally about relationships. The police, especially our walking beat officers, are an important part of maintaining community safety, but we know that we can't police our way out of every problem. That's why back in 2017, IBALTC partnered with the Oakland Chinatown Coalition, the Chamber of Commerce, and Asian Health Services to support a pilot program called the Chinatown Improvement Initiative. Our vision was to create a community ambassador program within Chinatown who would be a trusted everyday presence and whose focus would be on building relationships with and between merchants and residents and community folks and unhoused people and visitors. The initiative hired ambassadors through a partnership with a reentry program called Asian Prisoners Support Committee, with the idea of reintegrating people back into our community. These ambassadors were multilingual, able to move and communicate across cultures, trained and held to community accountability standards, and over a period of more than 2 years, they became trusted by our community because they could empathize with a wide variety of people and because they showed up every day. Over the past year, IBALTC has been working with the Chinatown Chamber and many others to start a local neighborhood property tax supported community benefits district, or CBD. It's like a business improvement district, but it's meant to benefit the whole community and not just the merchants. We're working to bolster the successful Community Ambassador Program and make it a permanent part of our CBD, which we hope will be able to start operations later this year. Because that program was the best way we saw to bring people from a lot of different backgrounds into relationship with one another and improve safety within our neighborhood. It's been such a difficult year. People are desperate to survive, but we're all also desperate to connect to one another. And it's difficult to shove a senior citizen to the ground if you see yourself in them, if you have a relationship to them. It's difficult to racially profile someone if you're not afraid of them and you can see that person as an individual, if you've played together in our parks and recreation centers. But we need to invest in community safety infrastructure and spaces and people who can bring those different communities together into relationship. We need to invest in restorative accountability to one another and in solidarity against the conditions that make many of us poor and desperate and unconnected to begin with. Ibaltsi has been doing this kind of resident leadership and engagement work for many years, and our neighborhood-based collaborations in Chinatown, West Oakland, and East Oakland are an expression of how our communities can work together. We look forward to partnering with our neighbors and allies to make this coming year a safer one for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final speaker is Leiwa Wu with Chinese Progressive Association.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Leiwa Wu. I am the Policy and Alliance Director at Chinese Progressive Association. Sorry, I'm a little cold. We're dedicated to educate, organize, and empower the working class immigrant Chinese community in San Francisco to build with others for better living, schooling, and working conditions for everybody. I am here today to stand with those harmed and their families, to stand in the pain and the anger of our community, because this anger is such an expression of deep loss of dignity that's been boiling over time. And just like everyone else, we've seen our working class Asian American communities and even our own families bear through the devastation of mass unemployment, our young people managing the mental health isolation of learning, folks risking their safety to go back to work as frontline workers. And we are here together today as San Francisco and Oakland residents, because we know that violence, whether it's small, whether it's interpersonal or systems wide, affects all of us. And when one of us is hurting, everyone is hurting. I also know deeply that we are resilient people. Our cities as our home are our home, and we, especially everyday working people, have weathered through one crisis after another. We're also most resilient when we build together across communities. Yes, I've seen the pitting of communities against each other, but I have also seen the strength and the hope that have been summoned through the difficult conversations we've held, the ways we've created space to name our community's grief, speak to our ignored needs, let others bear witness, and also holding faith in everyone's potential to heal. I'm also heartened by the many leaders and members of the Black and Latinx and Indigenous communities who have reached out to join in our grief and offer support and solidarity. I'm going to say it again. Many of the speakers have shared this. This is the time to be serious about healing. We need our cities to resource our people and our communities to do it. The cities of San Francisco and Oakland needs to increase long-term community-centered investments that address the current harm and causes through three things. One, we ensure victims and services of all backgrounds and language receive full support services so they can recover and heal. Two, expand intervention and prevention-based programs like our community ambassador programs in San Francisco and Oakland, and to invest in community-based infrastructure that we know will end the cycle of violence. And three, to take seriously and resource cross-racial education and healing work that humanizes all of us rather than demonizes or scapegoats any people of color. At the end of the day, this is up to us to keep our communities accountable. We must work together across cities to do the work to engage the tensions, condemn anti-Asian racism with folks in our communities without being anti-Black, and fight for the resources we all need. This choice is ours. Let us imagine what real safety could look like for our people and build a future we want to see, one that's grounded in accountability, injustice, and love for each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leiwa. And to all the speakers, we would like to at this time open it up for Q&A from the press, and we'd like to invite you to raise your hand and ask your question directly. And if you would like to direct your question to one of the speakers, to please do so. And you can also ask your question in the chat if that's your preference as well.
Any questions, or are we all mute?
I would like to ask a question. This is Sunita Sarabji with Ethnic Media Services. I'm wondering what each of you, how you see engaging with the community at large to speak about the humanizing that each of you mentioned, so that the community is less targeted.
Sarah, would you like to start us off?
I'm actually sorry, I didn't hear it well from my side. Can you repeat the question?
Yes, absolutely. How do you see engaging with the larger community to humanize Asian Americans so that the community is less targeted as scapegoats? Challenging the rhetoric of the previous administration, for example.
I believe the question is, beyond the Asian American community who has heightened awareness about these issues, how can we make sure, amplify that this is an important issue outside of the Asian American community? Did I?
Yeah, no. But as a, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. My question was, each of you spoke about humanizing the face of the Asian American community so that we are less victimized. And I'm wondering how you each of you plan to go about that.
Yeah, Sin, I can, if you don't mind, sure. I can take a first shot at answering. Thank you very much for your question. Humanizing each other is really about being in relationship with one another. And so I talked a little bit about the work that Abaltsi has done, not only over the last year or 3 years, but really over the 45 years that we've been in existence. We have buildings all over Oakland where we own and operate affordable housing, have buildings all over Oakland, and cross-cultural kind of work and engagement is something we have always done in Oakland, and it's so important. So it's partially about building spaces for people to be together, whether that's affordable housing buildings, whether those are community rec centers and parks where the public can gather. But it's also about investing in people, the kinds of people who can bridge cultures, who can bring people together. And that was what was so powerful about the Community Ambassador Program in Oakland, Chinatown, was that we invested in folks, we, along with our partners and a whole bunch of allies and philanthropy, invested in people who were able to bring people together. So they were constantly on the street, constantly present, and really could nip things in the bud before they escalated into problems. So that's how we humanize one another, is to be in relationship and in the same space with each other.
I can add a little bit, sorry, that with the Coalition on Community Safety and Justice, one of the core components will be actually doing a cross-cultural building with the other community, especially with the Black community and the Asian community. We hope to actually train or to bring a group of ambassadors together from both communities to really learn from each other, the cultural differences and similarity, and also the challenge that we face, and really bridge together to also have a single voice to the general greater community to show the solidarity to the San Francisco community as a whole. I don't know if Laiwa or anyone would like to add on that.
Yeah, can I add to this? In Oakland, we've been working with a lot of multiracial partners for many years, actually working on a smaller scale to do these exchanges with our members and our communities and have these multiracial, cross-cultural conversations. On Saturday, we actually are going to be holding a multiracial collective healing event and around 3 to 5 p.m. to start the conversation and restart this conversation and effort around our communities coming together. We have many, many leaders from the faith community, from the Black community, from the Latino community and Indigenous communities who want to come out, share their support and their statements of solidarity, and also commit to this long-term process of cross-cultural building and exchanges that is going to take more time. And so this work, I just want to shout out and highlight, has been in the works for many, many years. And this is a perfect moment to continue to do that work, build it up bigger, build it more robust, and recommit to really multiracial solidarity and unity.
Can I add a little bit too? Hi, this is Leiwa. Yeah, I really appreciate your question. I think, you know, a lot of us had lifted this up in our reflections, that there is a lot of pain and there is a lot of suffering that everyone is facing, and we all know this with the COVID pandemic. It's caused so much, exacerbated the inequities in our economy, right? Especially for our Chinese community, our Asian American communities of color. A lot of our members work in service, work in restaurant industries, and that has been hit particularly hard, with many folks unemployed, right? On top of the assaults, right? There's no adequate language access for a lot of government assistance and programs. So the need to name our hurt is absolutely real. And we also know that this issue is also about extreme inequality in our country and across the region, San Francisco and Oakland, right? Where the larger question is, how is our city going to prioritize our community's needs over the needs of corporations? How are we going to make sure that everybody has been paying their fair share and also gets the resources, has the infrastructure to not only heal, but thrive, and to begin, so that we can begin to do the cross-racial communication, education, and healing that we all deserve.
Sarah, I think, wanted to add in.
Yeah, really quick that I missed it. It's also was very important to invest in our youth, and also ethnic studies through education. We need to make sure we have this environment for our youth that they're fighting for, and we need to be a role model for our youth at the same time as a whole community.
Thank you. I do see one hand up from Patricia Ice. And again, encouraging folks to raise your hand.
Yes, here I am. I am Patricia Ice. I'm an immigration attorney, and I live in Jackson, Mississippi. I work with the Mississippi Immigrants' Rights Alliance. And I was invited to this event by Olivia Lee, who lives in San Francisco, who's an immigration lawyer. Since I don't live in California, in the Oakland area, I wanted to ask some questions about that, about what's going on there. I am very interested in the area. I've been there many times. My husband was born in Berkeley, spent his first 7 years in Oakland, and up until his 20s in the Los Angeles area. He's a fourth generation Californian. And and he's also on the board of the National Network for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, which is based there in Oakland. Anyway, I'm wondering if this violence that is happening, is it due to COVID-19, or is it just general in nature? Can you tell me a little bit more about what has happened? Because I'm not quite familiar with it, but I'm very, very concerned and interested.
Patricia, thank you so much. And I'm so glad that you found out about our press event. And I'd like to answer this question for you and share with you my email, because I'd love to share more about what's happening, and encourage members of the press to ask their questions. So this has actually been a long-standing issue, issues of crime and violence, and many of us on the call have been working towards solutions that address the immediate harm and what some of the underlying causes of crime and violence, and sometimes those that are hate motivated. So although under COVID, there has been a surge in anti-Asian racism, this isn't anything new. In fact, as you know well, our communities are often scapegoated. Communities of color are scapegoated during times of crisis, and this is something that I think we have to fight against together. So I'd like to just encourage. Thank you, Patricia. I really appreciate it. Love to encourage members of the press to raise your hand. You can unmute yourself, direct your questions.
Sin, are there questions in the Q&A doc?
I see some now. I work with Art together, and we work on creating community and healing for refugee and immigrant populations where settlement agency services end. Are there cross-cultural organizations and initiatives that your organization's already working alongside, and how we can get involved? Would anybody like to take that? Stanley, would you like to take that?
I'm terrible with questions. Can you repeat it really quick for me?
Sure. I think there was a question about cross-cultural community organizing based on art and culture, and if there are any initiatives that you'd like to highlight, especially ones that APALs are involved in.
So, sorry, there's construction happening here if y'all can hear it. But yes, I think in recent years and historically, APAL has worked cross-culturally with Black-led and Latinx-led organizations to kind of push forward different various issues around gentrification, ed justice, restorative justice. And we always have, I think, arts events that are centered around community healing, community vision that we have out here in Chinatown. I think with the current moment, we are exploring or restarting, I think, a relationship with urban peace movement and thinking about how our API youth can meet with Black and Latinx youth to reimagine public safety. I think right now it's a very kind of city-driven kind of political process. I think us as an arts organization are going to think about how can we incorporate arts and culture into kind of telling that narrative and kind of bridging that gap. So, we're always looking for areas to kind of collaborate, especially when it comes to cross-cultural healing and art.
Thank you, Stanley. There was a question about some of the stats that I provided initially. So through Stop API Hate, we've received over 2,800 incidents. Again, largely verbal harassment, and a smaller number of incidents that were potentially hate motivated. And this was a period from March 19th through December of 2020. And again, the incidents that have occurred in the Greater Bay Area is roughly over 700. Any other questions? We have South China Morning Press.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, thanks so much, Cynthia. This is Owen Churchill. I'm with the South China Morning Post out of Hong Kong. Thanks so much for this panel. It's really interesting. I just had a couple of questions. First of which about the issue of policing. And I'd be interested to get any of the speakers' response to some of the concerns that have been raised by Black community organizers following some calls from within the Asian community to increase policing as a result of these attacks. And related to that, I would be curious to hear your evaluations of some of the kind of self-organized patrol initiatives that I've seen cropping up I think I saw one in Chinatown in Oakland. I'd be really interested to hear your takes on that. Thanks.
I'd like to invite Alvina to start us off, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, like we were saying in our message before, there are a lot of self-organized different groups who are going out on the streets and wanting to just keep more eyes out for our seniors and our community. And while we appreciate the effort, we're also really concerned that, folks are organizing their own. They're not necessarily trained in de-escalation tactics and may not actually be connected to a lot of the community resources that we want to be able to share the way that our Chinatown Ambassador program is trained to do so. And while we appreciate those efforts, again, through our work and our organizations, we have longstanding accountability to our members and our communities that we just want to make sure are highlighted in this moment. I think some of the political dynamics that have happened is that we've seen budget cuts. I mean, all our municipalities are facing budget cuts due to COVID and the economic downturn in this moment. And because of that, the walking officers, which are also known as the community resource officers in Oakland, have been cut for this current budget cycle. And in Oakland, we're renewing the budget cycle this summer. But for the rest of the fiscal year, we've been told that they will not be brought back, and they're not going to be bringing those resources back into Chinatown until the next budget cycle is passed, which is very disappointing. And I think that we really need to think about how do we increase the feeling of safety over time and really think about how we can continue to build up our cultural vibrancy in the neighborhood to allow for folks and our seniors and all of our immigrant and refugee members to come into Chinatown and feel safe again. So I think those are some of the reactions and responses, and part of what we are trying to do as the Oakland Chinatown Coalition and helping to coordinate all of these volunteer efforts that are popping up. There's at least 5 to 8 different individual groups that we've been personally starting to connect with to let them know about the Chinatown Ambassador program, to let them know how they can actually volunteer with us, and what we're calling our volunteer strolling efforts, right? Not to just patrol our streets, but actually to stroll and shop and eat in our Chinatown and support our businesses and make relationships, pass out maybe pass out some candy, help clean up extra blight and trash that they see, so that when we're walking around, we also feel safe. And what we're really trying to do, again, is coordinate all these different efforts so that we can boost the people power that we have and not just continue to silo off into what everyone thinks is right. And I think that there are some concerns in this moment around some of those individual patrols that may be promoting or increasing racial profiling and also harassment of non-Asian folks into the neighborhood, which is something that we definitely do not stand behind, because we know Chinatown is a part of the larger community and it's for everyone. It's not just for our immigrant and refugee communities. And so we need to make sure that Chinatown stays inclusive and safe for everyone to come through and come in. And so these are some of the efforts that we have, and that we are building good relationships with these different independent groups and the merchants, and really wanting to remember to center on what is it that the merchants need in this moment, what is it that the survivors and those impacted by all these violent crimes need in this moment in order for us to come together.
Thanks, Alvina. We did have a question come in about what we're trying to do to make sure that mainstream media covers these issues. And I would like to go ahead and just respond and then invite Reverend Fong, who has been working on this issue for decades. So one thing that I do want to say is that we have been trying to raise visibility about this issue, but also to make sure that we're driven by, the facts. And to make sure that we're not creating hysteria around, what's actually really happening in our communities. It is important to understand that there has been a surge related to COVID-19, that this isn't anything new, and that these recent incidents, whether they're racially motivated or not, is having a great impact on our community's sense of safety. So there is more work to do. And what I would love to see is the media across the board cover stories about how we're coming together, how we're working and building solidarity, because we're all affected by violence. Those are the stories that I think I would like to see. And we see these news cycles, right, where there has to be some terrible, horrific incident and there's media attention on it. But what about the long-term solutions that we're working towards? And I think that across the media platforms, we could get more coverage on that side. Reverend Fong, would you like to add?
Sure. How much time do I get?
A few minutes.
Okay. For me, we have been dealing with this issue in many, different ways, but 10 years ago or 11 years ago, I remember the same thing happening in the Bayview, where an elderly 89-year-old man was beaten to death. A woman was thrown off the 3rd Street light rail. And I studied it a lot and learned that there was young folks that were challenging each other, like gang members saying, punch them out. Let's see if you can knock them out in one punch. So at the same time, I learned that it was, a result of the bad economy, like, 2008, the recession and all that, and not enough jobs and resources. So there's multi-layers to this. And what's the other level was I learned from the youth at the time, because I said, okay, how can we work on this multiculturally, right? They came up with, we want more ethnic studies, including Asians in there. That's one thing. We want the community ambassadors too, and all that. But when Black pastors and others joined us in solidarity during that incident, we did prayer services right on the 3rd Street light rail. I think that helped a little, but it was more the superstar, like Danny Glover came out and said, come on, youngins, stop this thing. We are not treated humanely by the mainstream media. More positive stuff has to come out on this. We need our brothers and sisters from other communities to step up now to back us up in solidarity. We need to, I don't know, it's like, it's been a struggle forever. Not be used by presidents and politics. Like Ronald Reagan's the one that started the model minority myth. He said it out loud and got, Black community mad at us back then. Trump does it again, China virus, so it legitimizes on the top level. So there's many layers to it, and I'm talking too much, but I hope that answers somebody's question.
Thank you, Reverend Fong. We did have a question. This is addressed to any one of the panelists. Could we speak to the perception of the lack of police response, and how difficult is it to have these cases treated as hate crimes? And I'd like to invite maybe Judy, if you could start us off.
Sure, thank you for that question. I think for our community, the Southeast Asian, what we've heard from our members is the language issue. Many of our community members don't speak English, so there is going to be less likely for them to call the police or report the incident. And I also, for our community, I think trauma is a big factor when they came as refugees. I think the experience of war and resettlement and coming to the United States, our community members do not trust authority. Many don't. And so the lack of language access and then the lack of trust, it goes unreported. they come to our center and they tell us, this incident happened, that incident happened. And we ask them, do you want to make a report? We could do this. It's anonymous. And many of them said no, because they're just very scared. They're scared that if they report it, I think the time that it will take to talk to the police, it's going to eat into their time. And so they don't have time. They want to kind of get it over with. And so they don't report because they're working. And the language issue is a really big factor in our community. There's no bilingual officers. There's no bilingual resources that support the community to make these reports, other than the community or coming to our community organizations.
Yeah, I'd like to follow that up by saying that our experience when we started Stop API Hate is, we asked the respondents, what they did when they encountered hate, and I think it was very telling that they came to our site to report the incidents, and largely addressing the hate crimes aspect of it is that hate crimes legislation and prosecution has largely been ineffective in the sense that it doesn't address the underlying causes and motivation for someone targeting someone based on their race or gender or national origin. And they're very actually difficult to prosecute. Very few cases go forward because of the having to prove intent and all that stuff. So we do have to look beyond sort of traditional ways that we address these challenging issues, especially if we've seen that they have not been as effective, I think, as originally envisioned. So we are 1 minute to the end of our press event. You can contact our communications person that was listed on the advisory, who can direct you to the speakers on the panel if you'd like to have follow-up questions. And there are also speakers who can speak in Cantonese as well, if that's your preference. So this concludes our press conference. I thank the speakers and members of the press and community who joined us today.
Sin, can I add one more announcement?
Yes.
I just want to lift up, reiterate what Alvina had mentioned earlier. Our 2 concrete calls to action are: 1, there is an Oakland action coming up 3 to 5 p.m. on Saturday. And then there's also, in San Francisco, we will be holding a parallel action on the following day, Sunday, Valentine's Day, 11 a.m. at the Civic Center Civic Center Plaza, in solidarity, right, to continue to speak the message of us needing to come together as a community, address harms and racism, and also be able to come together to find solutions for ourselves. So thank you.
Thanks, Lewa. And thank you, everyone.
Whoops.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Hey, I can get the church's stuff for that Sunday event, Valentine's Day.
That's great, Reverend Fong. We will communicate.
I need information, but then it can't be in the morning. It's got to be after church. Okay. Take care, and take care of your sniffles.
Thank you, Reverend Fong.
Oh, you're beautiful.
Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna end the meeting.